Please, good morning, sorry for the delay. And what were the issues? Other issues. We're balanced again. And work so we can change our slides if we need to. So everyone is welcome in the room, and those who are joining us online by Zoom, you're welcome as well to today's event. Now, for in-house housekeeping, I have to give the following instructions. One, there's no planned fire alarm today, so if one does happen, please be seated, make the staff guide you out of the building. The staff will be on this table, now represented by Paula Lowe, but anyway, hopefully she'll be joined by some assistants. The bathrooms are through there on the right. Please switch off your mobile phones. And actually, as I say, I should do it myself. So there's no buzzing during the meeting. The room is set up in the way it is because we're going to have a roundtable discussion afterwards, but you can all turn your seats as required in order to see the screen and see what is happening. For those joining us on Zoom, I'd welcome as well. Everyone will be muted at the start of the talk, and please ensure you remain muted as well so that there be no interference. Switch off your camera, please. Use the chat function, and for best viewings, recommend speaker view. Now, I note to everyone today's proceedings are going to be recorded. Will be available later for those who wish. Deal with that. Now, Lytton House is 250 years old today. This glorious building was opened to inmates, as they were called at the time, residents, the year 1775. And we, throughout this year, have been holding a variety of events to recognize the 250 years this society has been operating as a corporate body. It actually started a little earlier, as I'll tell you in a moment. During this year, we've been organising a variety of legacy events held in this building, tours, conferences. We've had exhibitions as well, all designed to tell the story of the history of the society over the last 250 years. Now, this year we've also aimed to try and gain greater outreach, make ourselves known to others, to new parties, to new donors. I say that again, to new donors, if you know any, new audiences, and extend the reach of the knowledge of our work and history. This event is part of that process. Now, the event is uses a magic word, I think, avatar. The society is an avatar for social reform. I have to thank my colleagues here for coming up with this word, avatar. I understand it can refer to a film that I haven't seen, but that is nothing to do, I think, with what we're talking about today. So avatar, as Paula's definition goes, it represents a manifestation of an idea. And what is the idea? Well, the idea, a simple idea for the charitable society is that it seeks to address disadvantage. So we regard ourselves as an avatar for that idea, that we will address disadvantage. And how are we going to do it? Well, we've done it in many forms over the years, and we have changed as circumstances require us to change. So we're going to have 3 speakers there as well, 4 speakers today. And I am going to, first of all, say something about the work of the society and the history of the society. So with those introductory remarks, if I could move to what I want to say about the avatar for change, social reform. Now, As I said, Belfast Charitable Society's purpose is to address disadvantage. And this ward that we are in North Belfast is one of the most disadvantaged wards in Northern Ireland. And we have a programme of support for those in need, and it takes a wide variety of forms. But for today's exercise, what I thought I would do was take a look at social reform in relation to the early years of the Belfast Charitable Society. Because Clifton House, this is now one that was originally known as the Poor House, then as now operates in the voluntary sector, by which I mean that it is not receiving public funding. And when one deals with social reform, I think there may be a different dynamic operating in relation to working in the voluntary sector that applies if you're dealing with public sector work. So this magnificent building, as I've said, has been the home of the Charitable Society throughout that time. But some of the aspects of the beginnings of the work of this society, I think, are relevant to the social reform today, although of course in a very different context of today and the social conditions that apply today. So I want to mention a few of those aspects as they applied at the time this building first came into use. The first aspect I want to mention is the need for some springboard for action, a campaign for change that needs to be initiated, a trigger that has to be identified to set things in motion. And in 1752, that springboard was a meeting of the merchants of this town of Belfast at that time, who met in the town to seek means by which they would address the needs of the poor of the town. And they agreed to do that by establishing a charitable society and building the Poor House and an infirmary, which this building also housed at that time, because of course there was no hospital provision, as we would now know, in Belfast, or indeed in Hobart County Antrim at that time. So they agreed to build this building. You'll note that it was 18 years from the decision to develop the building in 1852 until it was opened in 1774. And that is largely, as it would be today, a funding issue. Now, today, a different springboard for action might apply, and I like to think it would be the work of my colleagues here, the researchers, who would provide the empirical foundation for any proposed changes. And I'm sure they welcome that role, and they're going to tell us about that role shortly. But if I may stay with the early days of the Belfast Charitable Society, because it was a largely merchant town at that time, a prosperous merchant class, living alongside a town with significant poverty at that time, and substantial numbers of beggars, which were influential in the need to address the problems of the town. But society was, of course, less well developed at that time. There was no social welfare system as we know it today, although from the beginnings of Belfast, the burgesses at the time collected and distributed something known as poor's money. And this fund, which was operated by the town council, transferred from the burgesses to this society in 1774 when it was opened. Not, I must say, without much dispute, and ultimately resulting in legal proceedings to try and recover some of the poor's money. A step, I should say, despite my background in the presence of the lawyers here, step to be avoided if possible. And of course, not only was there no social welfare system, there was no poor law system in Ireland, such as had applied in England since the Elizabethan times. Now, the English system imposed a rate on property, and this was to provide the support for the poor. But there was no such measure in Ireland, although the Irish Parliament did address the needs of the poor at this time from time to time, but rather on a piecemeal basis and largely directed at the big centres of population in Dublin and Cork. And there was no national scheme in Ireland to address the poor until 1772, just 2 years before this building And an act of the Irish Parliament was passed in 1772, and it created what are known as houses of industry. They did that in each county and county borough and city in Ireland. Now, the 32 counties qualified, and they had been established in the 16th century, so they were in place at this time. A county borough is a separate administrative unit within a county. There's only one in Ulster, and that is Fergus. And it also applied to the cities. And there were 7 cities in Ireland at that time, and in the north that included the city of Armagh, which was the ecclesiastical capital, and included the Derry/Londonderry, where city status had been granted to Derry in 1604, and city status was then granted to Londonderry in 1613. So that's a total of 9 areas in what is now Northern Ireland that could have been places where houses of industry were constructed under this scheme, the 6 counties, 1 county borough, 2 cities. Now, I've referred to the issues of the poor in this rather than directly support for the poor, because the concerns which were driving people to set up the scheme and the scheme which used to follow in Belfast were both altruistic in the sense that they were providing support for the poor, but they were also self-serving, as I hinted at earlier, in that they were, of course, directly concerned with concerns about the image created by the extensive begging that went on in the city, and the raggy poor who were seen throughout the time. I said city there, of course it wasn't the city at that time. So what the system did when the houses of industry was to create a system of support for the needy. Badges were provided if you were a beggar, and you're only allowed to beg if you had been approved and got your license, and that was shown by walking around with your badge, and that you'd be undisturbed if you're begging that manner. But if you didn't have the badge and you were begging, you'd be detained. But it also provided, because of this dual purpose that it was serving, it was also a system of correction. And if you were regarded as one of the sturdy poor, then you were allowed to be detained. And you could be detained in this house when the necessary powers were eventually given to do that, because the sturdy poor were regarded as idle if they weren't working. And that was the measure of the times. So what that scheme in 1772 did, it established a corporation in each of those areas that I mentioned. It imposed a charge on property so that that would pay for it. It only required the houses of industry to be built when there were sufficient funds. There were then bodies known as grand juries, and they imposed these charges. And they did decide, because they were the local people who were going to pay for it anyway, that they wouldn't actually lose their charge. It was only available when the funds were available. So, as I say, there were 9 potential areas in what's now Northern Ireland. There is no record of any houses of industry being built in any of those 9 centres on foot of the 1772 Act. Now, you'll note that Belfast is not included in this scheme, and that's because Belfast was a borough. It was not a county, it was not a county borough, and it was not a city. So it didn't qualify under the statutory scheme. However, when that act was passed, the Irish Parliament and the merchants of the merchants of Belfast had already started this building. And it was by voluntary contributions at that time, not by a property charge. The foundation stone was laid by the Sovereign of Belfast in 1771, completed by amateur architects by 1772. But with the national scheme having been introduced and Belfast not being included, the Belfast Committee of the Poor House, which was then in place, decided that it could operate more effectively if it had the statutory powers that had been granted to these houses of industry. So it petitioned the Parliament to grant it those powers. And by good fortune, In 1774, the Irish Parliament was considering an amendment of the Act that was introduced only 2 years before, because it found certain hiccups that had arisen in relation to administration. And this was the very vehicle by which the 1774 Act came into being, because they applied to the Irish Parliament in order to be incorporated in 1774. And that is what happened. The Charity Act was passed at that time, and parts of that act still apply as the legal framework of this society today, from its origins in the Irish Parliament. Now, what we're talking about here is institutional reform, and that was necessary in order to develop structure to address the issues. For the course of that time, there was no infrastructure. So although I'm talking about institutional reform, we're also talking about reform on the ground here, and I think my colleagues will say a little more about that, because that change can be effected, of course, within the institutions that have already been created. But at the top of the tree, one has to have a legal framework, and that legal framework created the institutions that we know today. So that led to the second aspect of this that I want to talk about, that is parliamentary approval, because real structural reform actually requires statutory change. And that is what was achieved in 1774, and it's what was necessary in 1774 in order to establish any kind of institutional framework. This building was that one and only institutional framework which was created to address this advantage in all its forms. What's the multitude of institutional arrangements we have today? There was for this society in 1774. So it was introduced by parliamentary approval in 1774. At that time, Belfast had 2 MPs in the Irish Parliament, and it was one of the Belfast MPs, George Hamilton, who introduced the amendments that applied the statutory powers that the House of Assembly and applied them to this society. As an aside, I should say that George Hamilton left Parliament in 1776 to join the High Court in Dublin. Now, the effect of the 1774 Act was to establish a legal framework for this society. It named certain members, provided for general membership by subscription. It identified the objects as being supporting the poor by age and infirmity. Note, it was poor by age and infirmity, which leads to the distinction about those who are not elderly or infirm being poor. They're not in the same category. And as I say, issuing badges to the licensed beggars, which system applied here after 1774. And it authorized the detention of the sturdy beggars and required them to work in the building at that time. Now, there were some variations between the national scheme and the Belfast scheme, and that was really the funding model, because as I've explained, the national scheme was based on a rate on property, and that went to fund the houses of industry, of which over Ireland there were about 11 built, but as I've said, there were none built in this part of the country. But in the Belfast scheme, there was no property charge, there was no property rate applied to the support of the building. It was based on voluntary subscriptions and provided charity sermons. Membership was based on a subscription, which was 1 guinea a year. I need you to check out what a guinea was, but that was the subscription for the voluntary model at that time, and 1 guinea a year. Now, the funding model was one difference, but I digress to mention the membership of the corporations which were formed along the houses of industry and charity society. The national scheme involved the local bishops and the established Church of Ireland, the MPs, the magistrates, as well as some subscribers. But Belfast Charity Society had additional membership provided. First of all, the local landlord, who was Lord Ballygold, who provided the land for the building. And secondly, the Act provided for 3 Presbyterian ministers to be on the, as membership of the board. Now, this is an interesting addition, which didn't apply throughout the national scheme back because all the Presbyterians were up here. Belfast was a largely Presbyterian town, and they had 3 Presbyterian churches in 1774. They were all in Rosemary Street, and one of them is still there. First Presbyterian is still there. It's got a glorious interior. Really magnificent, although that isn't the building that was there in 1774. There was one Church of Ireland, which is on the site of St George's in High Street. That's not the building that was here at that time either. And there's no Catholic chapel in Belfast until 1784, when St Mary's opened in Chapel Lane. But what's striking about the naming of 3 Presbyterian ministers in the Act that established this was at the time that Presbyterians, like Catholics, were excluded from public office. But also, the marriages performed by Presbyterian ministers were not lawful because the minister wasn't recognized as being a clerk in holy orders. And therefore, the children of such marriages were illegitimate. They corrected that by going to the local parish and being married by the Anglican minister. These restrictions on Presbyterians, however, applied at that time and removed them from public office, but those restrictions weren't removed until 10 years later, and the restrictions of Catholics were not removed until 20 years later. Although there were other restrictions that remained after that, because you know, emancipation occurred in 1859. So that is remarkable that the Anglican Parliament should have granted the rights to the Presbyterian Church, while at the same time, and to Presbyterian ministers in particular, while at the same time discriminating against them because they had created schism in the Reformed Church, as it was seen by the Church. And of course, today, really relying on this as part of the legislative structure of this, we have a highly developed legislative structure, and ultimately almost every institution that we know of today has been founded by, regulated by some kind of statutory framework. Any social reform may still require parliamentary action. Of course, below the institutional level, reform on the ground relies on the innovation of the members of the institution, as you can see in the instance here of the Chartered Society, as well as the work of the Student University. So that leads me to the next aspect I want to mention, and that is about public participation. Now, public participation is now assumed as an essential element of any process. Consultation, as we described that, and decision making is really not undertaken, at least by the formal process of consultation, especially where there is parliamentary approval. But here I want to refer to public participation in the institutions themselves. Now, there was limited public participation in the local council that applied in Belfast, but there was a much wider public participation that applied in the administration of the society. Perhaps I've overlooked the slides that are here, and here we have the founding statute. If you look at that, you see such old-fashioned language. This was the statute that introduced in 1774 that introduced the Act, and as I say, is still on the statute books. And if I go in the right direction, this is the seat of the National Parliament, which is opposite Trinity College in Dublin. The House of Lords chamber is open to the public and is worth a visit. That's much smaller than you expect, but it's beautifully panelled and has been restored. And the next slide isn't coming up. Caroline, can you press for the next slide, which is going to be something of the makeup of the 1774 Act. I've already mentioned that. If you go on to the next slide then as well, Caroline, and we catch up with it. Yes. This is the next slide. So I wanted to talk about the contrast between the town council and this corporation and the wider public participation there was. Now, Belfast Local Authority was established by charter in 1613, and it created a sovereign 12 burgesses who were effectively running the Belfast Council. And this is a John Root painting, which is a representation of the grant of the charter to Arthur Chichester, and that's him standing in the middle. And it's a representation in that, as you can see, I'm sorry the Zoom people I think can't see this, but it is past and present. You'll see the shipyard there. Of course, there was no shipyard. It shows Belfast as it's developed around the reading of the charter. And it shows rope works, it shows weaving and linen and so on. You can see the different images which are all designed to create the features of Belfast, the bridge in the background, the long bridge, which is no more, the Cave Hill behind, the market house to the left, and looking through an arch in order to create this image of the town that was created in 1613. But the local authority had limited powers, and it was only made up of the 12 burgesses and the sovereign, who were effectively selected on the landlord, who was Lord Donegal. And the MPs, the two MPs from Belfast, were then selected by the council. So there were only 13 voters, and of course they would have selected the candidate for open. So that was a very narrow public participation in public representation at that time. The Chartered Society was a slightly wider participation. Decisions were made by the members, and as I told you, they paid a guinea. So that there was that qualification, you had to have a guinea. But there was no property qualification to be a member of the society. There was no gender exclusion. At that time, there's no religious requirement, as there was elsewhere. And the guinea, though, was a not inconsiderable amount because the teacher of the poorhouse was paid £30 that year. So it's over a week's wages for a school teacher at that time. In 1774, there were 63 subscribers, and one of them was a woman, Mrs. Barbara Collier, whose name appears on the list. And those of you from Belfast will know Mount Collier, and the family obviously had an influence in that district. Funding was also provided by charity servants. That was in the statute designed to apply to the Church of Ireland, and also applied to the Presbyterians and the Catholic Church, who provided charity servant funds to it. There was no religious element on admission to the poorhouse, and each Sunday different groups religiously went to their respective religious houses for worship. But that was reliance on voluntary subscriptions, and such reliance always presents a challenge. And that leads to the final aspect I want to refer to, which is funding. Now, subscriptions and charity sermons were never going to be enough to fund this building as a poorhouse and infirmary. And there were products made in the poorhouse, sold. There were the acres of gardens, which are where the car park is. There was the development of a water service for Belfast, and Belfast, the Charity Society spent a lot of money on developing this water service for Belfast, and the wooden pipes which they installed throughout the town, some of which have been dug up and are to be seen on display downstairs. Charges were imposed by the society on those who had the advantage of being able to tap into the water supply, not without some concern about the entitlement to actually impose those charges. However, legislation eventually came in which allowed them to charge for the water. And they remained, the Charity Society remained the water authority for Belfast until 1840, when it was taken over by the water commissioners. Another project was the graveyard. And I don't know if you've been to it, but Clifton Street Graveyard is behind this building, next to the Anton Road, opposite Malachy's. And that was opened by the Charity Society of land, which was originally granted to the poorhouse. And it's now managed by the City Council, and it's open to the public and tours are available because there are many interesting historical figures can be referred to there. So these processes led to funding issues for the charitable society. Now, I think I'm going to have to speed up as we were a little late starting. I want to move along quickly now. So what were the numbers in Clifton House in 1833? I've shown you that because that was the first year we could find an annual report, but it's still available. You'll see actually 473. 473. That were going to all houses in this building. Where on earth? How can they have been in this room sleeping? You'll see the breakdown there, and that there are a lot of children involved. Half of them are children, and half of them are adults, half the adults, male and female, and so on. But extraordinary numbers, and the parts of the building at the back were built at that time, so it was remarkable that the railway house. So I'll not say any more about that. What the financial position, we're able to find the financial annual accounts for that time, and you can see here receipts. There are donations that we made at that time. See it better on my own sheet, I think. You see the requests. There are charity servants, which are an important feature. There's POOR's money, which is mentioned in the third set of capitals down there. Different sets of incomes. Subscriptions are substantial. Look at the very bottom. Here we are here. Sales of different things. What are they selling? Coffins, pigs. Not quite sure how they manage that. Other items are listed down there from the local industry. Expenditure on the other side. You'll see food is a very vigilant, as it's called. Food is, and just that's your salt, below salt is buttermilk. Look at the quantity of buttermilk. 100,000 quarts. That's 200,000 pints of buttermilk. Now we've got 400 people here. You have to work out how much buttermilk they drank over the year, but it's an extraordinary amount. I notice also included in that tobacco. They get a special allowance for tobacco. You wouldn't be doing that today. There's some interesting stories about the expenditure there, which I don't have time to go into. What were the day-to-day concerns? Well, this is from the minutes. I thought about 200 years ago. What were the concerns? On the 3rd of January, admissions, James 7 and John 5 McGarrett being destitute or orphans were admitted. Patrick Dowie, old and firm man in the hospital for 6 months. Anne Edwards, taken out a few months ago, readmitted. So something went wrong there. Felix Hamill, apprentice to T. Morgan, merchant for 5 years. So the Charity Society provided schooling. You saw infants, boys, girls, schools referred to there. When they were about 11, they were sent out on apprenticeships. He was a merchant, so maybe there was some special. Felix maybe became some special kind of apprentice, but he was apprenticed for 5 years, and the society oversaw the time they spent. I just want to read one more, which is from the minutes at that time, which isn't on the list. It says on the 24th of January, admission of Jane Dixon, daughter of the Reverend Dr. Dixon, quotes, whose habits are such as make it necessary to have her placed in some asylum where spirits would be kept away from her and where she would be kept in some useful form. Now, obviously, this woman had a difficulty, but you see the reference to it as an asylum. For those who had mental disorders, they were admitted into this house too until an asylum was built here, but not until shortly after this time when the asylum system was created. And this is the daughter of the Reverend Dr. Dixon. Now, some of you might know the name Steve Dixon. I don't know whether this is the same Reverend Dr. Dixon, but Reverend Dr. Dixon very nearly was executed during the after the rebellion, as he was one of the Presbyterian ministers who was in the revolutionary movement. As you know, some of the ministers were executed. Dixon is commemorated in Port Fairy. This is the same Dixon. But at this time, he would have been about 80 years old, so his daughter must have been quite old, and it may be because he died in 1824, that the daughter no longer had a carer, and she had to be admitted to the home. I don't know this, but Dixon is buried in the graveyard. So there may be a story there for some of the staff to research as to whether we're talking about the same Dixon and so on. The other entry is a committee to meet to consider applications for parish overseers for deserted children, and supplement is appointed to report on how many the parish was found to support. You see what's the current that's running there. Funding determines what we're going to take up. There was responsibility on the parishes to appoint overseers, and the deserted children were then managed by the overseers before they were sent to the workhouses or the houses of industry or into care or something later. It's notorious that one parish might find itself with a lot of deserted children and would somehow find a way of transporting it into the next parish, whose overseer then had to take on some. So there's a bit of shuffling around of the unfortunate children who have been deserted. So in conclusion, Getting House remains a voluntary organisation without public funding, and in times of economic pressure, voluntary subscriptions suffer a downturn. Now, a national poor law scheme was introduced in Ireland in 1838, and it created the workhouse system, which was founded by local rates and property. So in 1838, we had that universal property system. So Belfast built its workhouse. It was on the site of what's now the Belfast City Hospital. But the property owners who paid the rates for the workhouse were mainly those who had been and had the means to provide the support voluntarily. The poor house. So what is the consequence? The poor house revenues fall. Either because the owners thought that the workhouse system would meet the problem, or because they weren't in a position to fund both property tax and a voluntary subscription. So the poor house had to reduce its services accordingly, and so it did. And now this, remember, was under John Famine, which was in 1845, when the workhouse especially at 40. And contrary to common assumptions, the famine did have an impact in Belfast, but of course not to the extent that it had West of Ireland. The workhouse soon filled its 1,000 places and more, and the poor house numbers fell at that time. Not for lack of need, but for lack of means to address the need at that time. And I refer to this because the same applies today. The rising cost of living and added expenditure, alternative funding requirements, impacts on voluntary giving. And those who pay the taxes are often the ones who pay the voluntary subscriptions as well. And if they're impacted by increased taxes or increased costs or increasing the cost of living, this is an impact on voluntary giving. And this presents a particular problem in the voluntary sector, which we are in, because universal financial pressures tend to drain away from financial support for the voluntary sector. And so the very life of voluntary services becomes at risk for that very reason. If I could show the four aspects I've picked out there, which relate to the society when it originated, springboard for action, parliamentary action, public participation, funding, all apply equally well to many of the institutional changes that are required today, not so much to the on the ground, the changes that are required. But these aspects have an impact today. But the greatest of these is funding. And without funding, none of the other actions can have any effect. And so, in the end, it all comes down to money, even if we're talking about 1774. I want to end by just, I don't have time to go from what happened from the original society in 1774 up to today, but the work of the society today can be seen on the sheet that you have on the table, which sets out under the title, The History of the Society, you see from the bottom of the page, some examples of the work of the society, which is very widespread work today. And again, in order to do that, what is required? Very substantial funding, and our staff are constantly under pressure to meet the financial strains that apply today. So I hope that I've made sense of the origins of the society. We're going to hear more about the needs of today from my fellow speakers. But for me, thank you very much. I'm the speaker, and this is Professor Bernard Keever at Ulster University, who's a patient in, and she's going to talk about the power and impact of research in social reform. So, Ronnie, if you'll allow me to lead the introduction. And it's a very extensive one, yes, it will take some time. Ronnie is Professor of Law and Social Justice and Co-Director of the Ulster University of London. And she has published widely on social security and access to justice, focused on how individuals access their legal entitlements, particularly those who experience difficulties in accessing state systems of support. She's the joint editor for the Journal of Social Security Law, former member and vice chair of the UK Social Security Advisory Committee, member of the UK Administrative Justice, chair of the Independent Review of Discretionary Support for Northern Ireland, and a former chair and executive director of the Law Centre. Well, what an extraordinary talent. Your turn has come.
Thank you, finally. So I'm going to pick up on some of the themes that Jerome has talked about. I'm talking about law's role in moving us from poverty to social justice and its inadequacies, importantly, as well. So we will be treading some of the same. Maybe I'm, I'm wondering, right? So, what we wanted to do, first of all, so what we had intended to do was to bring people into the room that really have experience with this, because that's the beginning of the year. There's a lot of that goes on, there's a lot of, bringing people in and telling their stories and understanding from their perspective what this feels like. So it's not a slideshow, it's actually people. Rather than do that, we've utilised a website called Project for Changing Realities, which works with people who are experiencing poverty and disadvantage and difficulties in life, and record some of their thinking. So it's a publicly available resource. We picked 3 videos or 3 audio files to introduce these ideas, but actually my website is something I encourage you to visit. So rather than have somebody read it up the front, you're going to listen to some of those. that's the many number of testimonies that reflect that. It is really good to, the code, Patrick is not anyone in this area of social policy. We work with it before, and one of the participants who has recorded their voices, our voice for that project is working with us on finding ways through the maze of social provision today. So I want to take us through some of the oversight of where law has been and what it has done to try and shape social policy, and to shed some of the research that we can on it. So the question on how do we get to where we're at, or the new neighbours and the living in debt, and no point taking a purse string, there's nothing in the purse. How did we get that position? And thinking of when we started to speak this morning, when we started and said different social conditions today, and thinking, yeah, but there are lots of similarities that we ought not to be seeing. And so it's, you know, Siobhan's taken us through the history of this building and what it sought to do to protect those with the most deplorable wretchedness, the capital R for wretchedness, the types of relief, including for children who do not come over or they get a common food, children who at present infest the streets, not quite the child rights perspective that we might expect today, and that mixture of benevolence but also punishment, and all based on charity. There we go. So the question then becomes, okay, so that's a charitable setup. There have been, you know, as Ron said, lots of legislative structures around it and some attempt to put some legal protections in place, but really what we're looking for is a broader structural solution rather than relying on charity. So is law going to come to the rescue? Well, perhaps, because by the start of the 19th century, we had a case, obviously the inhabitants of Eastbourne, that talked about the law of humanity. So the law of humanity, which is interior to all positive laws, in other words, it comes before all of the legislation, all of the constitutional rights, and advises us to afford people relief to save them from starving. So we have this common law of humanity. That's terrific. We've got a judge saying we've got to save people from starving. Not the biggest, you know, it's a low base point, but nonetheless, we're grateful for it. So we've got something in the law. We then get the new poor law. As Ronnie talked about, we were brought in 1848, and we are looking for a sliver of a silver lining today, because the things about hope and what's that one. In my presentation, but we're talking about at least there is a duty, a statutory duty to relieve destitution. So that's the kind of silver lining of 2020. So law has a role to play here and can do something. The reality of relief, however, is quite different. We know that the term is, you know, from folklore, is about social control. It's not just about helping people who are poor. It is about producing workers. It's about enforcing moral standards. Those beggars, those children who infest the streets, those women who are obviously drinking too much and need a little bit of help. And it provides some sort of framework. But at the same time, there's no statutory right to relief. You can't rock up to the workers and say, I need some help. And discretion, therefore, is dominant. And that, when you have a system of discretion, that then starts to bleed into who's deserving and who's undeserving. So then we move forward rapidly, very rapidly, to where we start to see the law picking up on its duties. So after the poor law, lots of things happened. Of course, there was the famine, there was like civil war, partition. Let's skip over all of that. And we look at the role of the law in trying to embed some form of social justice, some form of protection for the poor. Of course, the most seminal thing that in our lifetimes is the welfare state. The Beveridge report, this revolutionary report that starts to tackle the 5 giants of evil: the disease, want, squalor, ignorance, and idleness. So idleness is definitely still there. Disease, want, squalor, ignorance become part of another aspect of the welfare state. But nonetheless, we've got this statutory provision. It sets up social security systems, it sets up education, it sets up hospitals, the NHS. We've got something. So law has a role here. We see as the legislation progresses that there is still an articulated role for law. So the National Assistance Act of 1948 talks about the duty to assist, the 1966 Ministry of Social Security Act, a right to benefit. So this is what the law is saying ought to happen. People whose resources are insufficient to meet his requirements. Now, that's the law on the books. Of course, the law on the books is never quite the same as the law in reality. And sociologists in our society have a role to play to reflect what looks like is happening, what is happening on the ground. So we have Philip Martin, famous sociologist, who came up with these pillars of citizenship, including social citizenship. And his reflections on the development of the welfare state was that the welfare state constituted this idea of social citizenship, social rights. But writing in 1963, so the welfare state created in the 1940s, 1950s, we see it rolling out, we see the benefits. By the start of the 1960s, he's talking about this post-World War II austerity society has been replaced by an affluent society with astronomical salaries, limitless expense accounts, and fabulous speculative gains on real estate and elsewhere. Sounds familiar? And it's in these circumstances that the basic benefits of the welfare state come along. It's not about we've got no money and therefore we can't afford to support people. It's I'm doing all right, Jack, you sort yourself out. And that starts to bring us into a kind of a better a fuller examination of what the law has done or what it can achieve. And what it looks like on the ground. And Andy, another sociologist, talks about this dialectic that social welfare has in the past. So all of that context that Ronnie provided today about how we have certain provisions for the wretched poor and children who are invested in streets. There's some education, there's some work, there's some things that are done by me. I don't know, too much about them. That we still have some relationship to all of that. But this is the current reality of welfare reform. Of welfare today. So we have people who are not reading the training. We have the control or the reform of the work child. That was very evident in the workout system. You bring people in and you reform them. We have narratives of deserving and undeserving. So that came through very clearly. If you were a deserving beggar, if you were a deserving woman, old, presumably, what that is, an old man or a child, anybody in between had to constitute a sturdy poor or somebody who would be worthy of assistance. There is a presumption of fraud and abuse. There was then, there is now. There's a tension now between benefits that are universal and those that they're given to everybody, regardless of what your income status is, and those that are means tested and targeted on particular issues. And we have particular impacts that are disproportionate, felt by women, children, disabled people, and non-nationals. So, very briefly, for the nerds in the room, the core Social Security benefits, I'm not going to do a lecture on Social Security benefits as much as I'd like to. We have a system, we have a Social Security system, for those of you not familiar with it. We have the main benefit, you look here, the universal credits, never out of the news, well, it might be out of the news, but I always think so. So it's universal credit and replaces the old job seekers allowance that you've probably heard of. It also takes in other benefits. So we have income support, which was the type of income replacement that you could get if you were old and infirm or you were young and you had a child and didn't have any work obligations. You had a housing benefit, so you couldn't afford your rent. You were given a little supplement, it wouldn't necessarily meet your rent allowance, but nonetheless, you were given some support. You had employment support allowance, so this is the benefit you get, that if you're deemed to not be fit for work because of illness or disability, you get it. But it's based on what income you have at the moment. We do have contributions-based employment support allowance, but it's much more limited than it used to be. We have child tax credit. You have heard of child tax credit in relation to the two-child limit. So the child element of child tax credit and working tax credit both will be phased out and rolled into universal credit, the two-child limit. Just a quick recap: if you've had a child since 1st of April 2017, you get the child element of universal credit or child tax credit for the first two children. The third, fourth, fifth, they're yours to worry about. The state has nothing to do with them, or to your child benefit. Some exceptions, controversially, the rape clause, where you take the third child or fourth child of the product rape, you may get some benefit, multiple births, kinship, and so on. And that's what our kind of core system looks like. So it's designed to cover most people of working age and their circumstances. We also have other benefits that we have, so we acknowledge directly the additional costs of being disabled. So we have personal independence payment, which is about providing support for mobility and mental health issues, and lots of things that prevent you from being able to operate at the same level as somebody who doesn't have this. With the child benefit, that was a universal benefit, one of our last ones. So regardless of what your income was, you registered the birth of the child pretty much at the same time as you put the application in for child benefit. That is now taxable. And taxable in quite a perverse way. So if you are introduced by George Osborne, man, great ideas, obviously. Introduced by George Osborne on the basis that if a household earned £50,000 or more, they would either be taxed to the point for child benefit to disappear, or they wouldn't get child benefit. And that might seem on the face of it reasonable, except that if two people in the household each earn £45,000, they get to keep it. So it's not a terribly well worked out system. And what we're starting to see then is the idea that everybody used to get child benefit. So everybody used to get a benefit from the welfare state. So everybody had a reason to keep it going. And this is now kind of starting to dissipate. And we see it much more recently with the state pension credit, state pension and pension credit. You may not have heard of pension credit if Labour hadn't decided to tax or to meet set for winter fuel payment. That was also a universal benefit, and it's not working out terribly well for them at the moment, to the right storm out, but that's another kind of insight into where the system is going. And then we have a system of discretionary support. We've always had discretionary support in the system because there will always be gaps. The gaps are now growing bigger, and discretionary support is not. So we have this system so why are people not able to make ends meet? Well, most people on universal credit are also working, but the universal credit standard allowance for those aged over 25, because you get less if you're under 25, because it doesn't cost as much to live if you're 24. So you get £85 per week for your standard allowance. Now there are lots and lots of measures that will identify how much money you need to live. So you've got things like the minimum income standard from the Joseph Brown Foundation. You've got engagement support for the child allowance. You've got Michael Marmot's review that identifies what you need to live a healthy life. And I have just picked this one because it's, it's no better nor worse than any others, and it's from the Joseph Brown Foundation, the Trust of Trust, and they are saying it's an essential guarantee, which is that universal credit cannot drop below this level. If it does, that's where you start to see problems. And their estimation is that should be, the salary line should be £120 a week. So each week, that's what your gap is every week multiplying. Your standard allowance for a couple, again, aged 25, must be terrible when you hit 25, because you know it's going to be more expensive to live. £134 a week, by the same methodology. Joseph Brown Trust said it should be £200 a week, so the gap is growing. For PIP, PIP is designed to equalise the playing field between people who have disabilities and people who don't, on the basis that it is just more expensive if you're disabled. It doesn't matter what age you are, you're still going to have a more expensive life. The level that's required to meet the same living standards for non-disabled household is estimated to be about £1,000 per month. And the maximum you can get on it, which is the highest score of all, which most people will not get, is £700. So again, the gap. So no wonder people are struggling. If these are the estimations that are being made. So why are they at that level? Just is the answer. Just because. So we have Steve Webb explaining this in 2005. Steve Webb went on with the pensions minister. Said the infamous person coming from Mars to look at our deliberation could see that we're talking about a very thick volume full of different rates for different sorts of people, and would assume that these rates are based on something. In fact, they appear to be based on what they used to be plus a bit. So there's no objective external basis on which we pay certain amounts to different people. Like, seriously, why would you not figure out what you need to pay and then do it? Seems logical, but we're talking about politics and law. So logical is not necessarily what we're going to do, but this is how the welfare state has changed. So that seminal moment of Beveridge hasn't played out necessarily the way that we expected. Perhaps it has, others expected more or less. But what we're seeing these kind of themes of the erosion of the statutory right to benefit. So that kind of poor law, duty to relieve destitution, the law is coming to rest. And we're starting to see, we have seen an erosion of it. So we started to see, first of all, the exclusion of those people who are on strike. You're on strike, you don't want any money, we're not giving you money, we're not going to encourage it. That's, of course, the minor strike in that area. We've also got major limitations based on immigration status. So if you've no recourse to public funds in RPF, then you don't get surely, and you get very, very, very little. So the next taxi driver tells you, you're over here, but you can tell them they have no recourse to public funds. Give them the acronym first, that'll be best. The loss of universality, this idea that everybody has a stake in the system, that's gone. Child benefits, the fuel payment are evidence of that. We have increased, we've spun from insurance contributions-based benefits, which is very this idea, which is in the cyclical nature of it, back to means testing. And means testing is not just mean, it's really expensive to administer, and it's often difficult to get right because there are lots of problems with it. So it's not a kind of good idea because you only give money to people who need it. It's also, it costs a lot of money to just find the people who need it and to just give it to them. So it's not a particularly great system, not that insurance is necessarily perfect either. We see increased conditionality. So the things that you used to have to do in order to be worthy of benefits, that the tenant conditions have risen, and the failure to do them have incurred sanctions, and that sanctions policy is becoming increasingly strict and severe. And we're seeing a renaissance of discretion. So lots of things you'll see that the government will say, oh, well, it's okay if we're cutting this because there's lots of discretionary schemes. It's a really good report that came out this week by Rita Griffiths, looking at the gaps that exist in that kind of discretionary support scheme, unfortunately not included in Northern Ireland, that focused on how actually people are worse off, because claiming these discretionary schemes will put them over a certain limit or other passported benefits, and so they end up worse off. So this idea, so for example, in some of it's just nothing. So for example, you might remember during COVID, it was a 25 uplift in the Universal Credit Standard Allowance, and everyone's going, yes, let's keep this. It's not great, but it's better than nothing, let's keep it. We're not keeping that, some costs. They tell you what, we'll throw $500,000 into the welfare support fund. But there you go, the welfare support fund, discretionary provision, administered locally, and nowhere near meeting the needs. So what we're looking at is this fallback of the voluntary sector in support of the undeserving, in particular, the migrants and the unemployed. So we talked about the poor, we talked about is needed to live a kind of basic life, the gaps. I'm going to bring you back to another concept, a reinvention of a concept that would be pervasive at the time that this building was created and the purpose for which this building was created. And it's about destitution. We're talking something going much further than extreme poverty. We were talking about the inability to meet basic needs for shelter, food, heat, light, clothing, and hygiene when a person only those. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation have been working on this for a number of years, and we just buy on the report. Under 2019 report said there are 2.4 million residents in the UK who experience this position. It's now gone up to 3.8 million. 1 million of them are kids, children. I mean, you might invest in street, but we do at least acknowledge that they have some rights now, and they ought not to impose 1 million children in the UK today. We came into this project for the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, working on a legal perspective on destitution. Because when you look at this and you think, this can't be right. Can't be right. That's what we think of as lawyers. It must be against, must be, let me have it. We know that destitution arises from lots of problems. So it's interaction of legal problems, social and financial issues. But social security is really heavily implicated. 3/4 of the people who are destitute in the UK are in receipt of social security benefits. So that's a big problem. And so we think, well, how do these things square? There's a right to relief, there's a statutory right to support, but it leaves you're still left destitute. So how is that working? What is social security for if it's not lifting you out of destitution? What is the point? Surely there's a legal requirement as well as a moral requirement. So we were asked to provide a legal definition of destitution to be reviewed with 600 UK judgments that used legislation that had a definition of destitution in it. Different destitution definitions apply, of course, different forms of legislation, but lots of overlaps with the JRF definition of what's missing. Some of them actually went further, so we talked about kids having a right to holiday, for example. And we're not talking 2 weeks in South France, we're talking day trip to Portrush. But even though these definitions are there, these are legislative definitions. The powers and the duties are weak. So you might have a right to it, but who has the duty? Who picks up that duty? What power do you have to compel them to exercise that duty in reality, never mind in theory? And we have insubstantial human rights standards. Apologies to all the human rights lovers in the room. I think they're great too, but we just don't have enough. And I can't tell you what I was going to call this report because it would be rude to say it. But the international human rights standards are not providing the protection to navigate that we need to protect people from destitution. So our conclusion, the regrettable conclusion, is that the UK currently recognises no absolute legal obligation to prevent destitution. What? Why? It shouldn't. Surely it shouldn't. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's fine, but no, it's not. It's not. And why do I think that? Well, I think that because I think that's what law should do. Because that's what my research and all that go like. What do ordinary everyday people think? Is none of us are ordinary everyday people, of course. But what do other ordinary everyday people think? Well, this is a module that was put into the Northern Ireland Times survey, asking directly about what people thought about poverty, but also specifically about social security, done with my one of the colleagues here working very closely, Mark Simpson, but other colleagues from Ulster and from Queen's. And so the views on the role of social security benefits, I'm not sure if you can see that, but the basic idea is that when asked, should social security benefits enable an individual or family to meet their basic living needs, 90% of people say yeah. So it's not just me that thinks that you should have social security, that reaches a level that allow you to meet your individual living needs. We're not going to talk about the people who disagree, or who, we're not going to talk about that. We look then at the kind of lower level, so based on basic needs to have a normal standard of living. Now, there's not as much support for that, but you still get 60% of people saying, yeah, normal standard of living. So more than half of our population saying, you should still be able to live a normal life. And then when we talk about living a life of dignity, the numbers go up again. So we have popular support in Northern Ireland for social security benefits, providing something better than they're currently doing. In terms of the effect of those questions or the interpretation of those questions based on sex and income, not really any discernible difference, men and women, and across the political spectrum, because there's one with them Protestants and then Catholics think. Across the political spectrum, we have this consensus agreement that people should have a basic standard of living in social security. We've got this principle that's strongly supported, probably not supported by those who are in the low income group, who should bring up the standard of living. Biggest support comes from the highest income group, which kind of makes sense of T.H. Marshall's idea that the affluent society is what destroys the welfare state. And strong support across all of those groups, and the benefits should enable a life lived in dignity. As to whether the politicians are doing a great job, we all can the answer to this anyway, but the idea of specifically being asked about whether the executive is doing all that it can to reduce poverty. It depends on your political allegiance. So, yeah, if you're in the UUP or the DUP, you're more likely to think that the government is doing better than if you're in the SDLP or Sinn Féin or the Alliance. It's not a great scorecard. Not great. Come on, you decide to defend that, but that's the Northern Ireland piece. We know, of course, that lots of the provision in Northern Ireland, which politicians get us often about what we get in Westminster, so it's all their fault. Well, let's look at people across the water, as they say. Let's look at what the British Social Attitude Survey says about Social Security. Are people, is that why the government is withholding money for Social Security because people over in England, Scotland, and Wales are not interested in Social Security? Well, it turns out that that's quite tricky to track. So there's been 35 years in British Social Attitude Survey, and attitudes towards Social Security ebb and flow. So it's not a constant, the public are constantly behind it. Sometimes they're in agreement and sometimes they're in disagreement. They tend to be most empathetic towards pensioners and the disabled, so that kind of deserving nature, those people who can't help themselves. So that's why Labour are really getting it in the teeth when they're going after pensioners. So they're not making pensions, when they have made decisions to cut, but we are least empathetic towards unemployed people. Which is a bit worrying because that's the attitude that we had in this house. The portion of people who believe the spending benefits for unemployed people should be reduced increased from 1998 to 2008, but then we started to see more generous attitudes from 2018. So we can't necessarily rely on the public, but what we have seen is what shifts attitudes. So on the one hand, what shifts attitudes are the way that the public follows the political discourse and the pattern of benefit expenditure. So Ben Geiger does some wonderful work on getting people into work and the attitudes towards benefits, and particularly in relation to disability. And his explanation is the attitudes towards benefits are more positive at the moment, right, in 2021, because the system has become less generous. And then after a short delay, people realize this, and then they start to think, you know, okay, that's a low level of benefit. So we can see coming, when we were in COVID, we saw a lot of people who ended up in their first credit and their DB going, this is what I'm getting, but I have a mortgage, I have a horse, I have all of these things, and you know, you can't get anything for that. So people start to think, okay, this is not great, and that's positive at the moment is what we're arguing for, is an increase in the level of benefit. The difficulty is that the pattern would suggest that once benefits increase, then the system becomes less popular, because they're getting more. They are getting more. And so there is then political traction again for cuts, and the cycle begins. So how do we break the cycle? What shifts attitudes? A lot of work has been done in this room, shifting attitudes. The idea that the poor will always be with us. I don't think we can, I'm not a theologian, probably because I'm so far away from theology, but that idea the poor will always be with us. I do remember that the Joseph Brown Community Foundation's chair, Julia Ullman, came to social justice section of the World Centre, and she dispelled that myth and said, actually, if you look at down in the Bible somewhere, that you will find that it's about creating. The idea is not that the poor will always be with us. The sentiment is you should look at the opportunity to do good wherever you can. So it's not a literal interpretation of poor will be with us. It was not, you know, Jesus and his disciples. I don't think we're endorsing the capital state. That's my take on it. So what can we do? Well, we can start to frame attitudes. We can start to say poverty can be solved. It's not an insurmountable problem. You can somebody on the slides who said it's so easy to fix. In many ways, it's true. It is easy to fix. If we had the political will and the cash counters, that would fix poverty. People who have more money because they need more money wouldn't be poor. You know, that's not a difficult idea. But it is very difficult to persuade politicians to redistribute resources in that way. Part of what we need to do is to humanise those, so we don't have categories of deserving and undeserving. And we need to raise awareness from them. So lots of you in this room will know I'm preaching to the choir, but lots of people won't appreciate the gap between what you get in benefits and what you need to do. Won't appreciate the impact that has in their neighbours. Won't appreciate, you know, that lives lived beyond our own lives are much more difficult. So what we have to do, what we have to aim for is not charity but social justice. And I think that's the role of this organisation and this event today. We want to look at a system that isn't just for the most disadvantaged, because that's how we alienate people from it. We've got to look at a system that works for everybody. And the idea that people are not in poverty, so society works better. That's something that we should be thinking about. We might think more about contributions, because of contributions-based approach, so you are putting something in, but you are getting something back. And so we take away from this notion of you have to target resources to where they're most needed, because these people are deserving, these people are less deserving. We have to focus on strengthening the basic rights that are required to meet the basic needs. Law has a role to play here. We need to help people claim their rights. We do a little bit of that at the Rural Clinic. We have law centre here. We have advice services here. We have lots of people in the room who do a lot of that. So despite laws, law and failures, so many people don't know. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. for the time, but I'll keep things moving and when we start 10 minutes early and try and finish 10 minutes later. I'd like to introduce our second speaker, Dr. Esther McGuinness, who's going to be accompanied by Claire Monroe, who is the co-director of the Social Justice Union. Now, Dr. McGuinness is going to speak about how the university and its community partners work to affect real change. And I'm going to read the piece I have about you, Esther. You're head of School of Law at the University of Ulster, a founding member and co-director of the Ulster Law Clinic, supervising LLM students, practices and advises on all areas of employment law. Mediator, 20 years experience in employment law field, founding member of the Social Justice Hub, Royal Family Justice Centre, specialising in advice and support to survivors of domestic violence and their families. And an All-Ireland correspondent for the Irish Yearbook of International Law, and a board member of Law Care and Mediation NI. And I'm not going to read Claire's CV for us, but I think Esther might do that when the time comes. So, Dr. Esther McGuinness.
I just have a presentation, there's just me, because I think that my role is to bring these themes together, and I was quite struck by Ronnie's historical context, and that these tiny architects, there was difficulty with funding, despite having a good structure legislatively, it took a huge amount of time and effort to affect change. Not much has changed in 250 years. Public participation was key then, public participation is key now. And I think that somewhere in that tapestry and that image of that tapestry, Giovanni showed earlier, there was a woman making a silk purse out of society. Because in this role, I think it's a lot of people here who work in the advice sector, feel that that's what we do on a daily basis. So let me just contextualize then some of the historic things, some of the academic stuff, and some of that avatar stuff that we mentioned earlier. A couple, it was my fault, I did come up with that, but yeah, I was stealing the word of John Stuart Mill, and it is about a manifestation of an idea. And I think that the Belfast Charitable Society is that manifestation of an idea. And I think we met certainly in 2018, shortly after Claire and I had established the Social Justice Hub again. And for those of you who don't know, apologies for those of you who do, I will not bore you with that. But the Law Clinic was set up about 13, 14 years ago now. 13. Yeah, I'm sure my hair was blacker and I had gaps between my teeth back then. And it really was set up as an educational program, but there was also a real need in communities across Northern Ireland to assist them with matters of employment law and social security, because the numbers were certainly piling up before the tribunal then, and the employment cases in particular very much still are, and others. The work of the clinic has been immense, really humbling and very, very rewarding, and we have had an opportunity to work with many of the organisations here and undertaking that work. But in 2018, we were approached by District Judge Michael Home in the Northwest, who was tasked with adjudicating the domestic violence courts there. And he witnessed a huge number, mostly women, coming before him without any support. So Claire and I engaged with Boy Woman Aid at that time, and we established the Boy Family Support Plan. And that was I think it's fair to say that the Clinic and Social Justice Hub, or the Social Justice Hub, is a community outreach limb of the Law Clinic. And we have taken that manifestation idea that as a university, we contain lots of very established researchers and academics and practitioners in different fields. And that it was our job to harness that expertise and to match that expertise with skills, student skills, because that's absolutely what they need, and to create a type of social innovation incubator, if you like, where we brought those students together with those experts in those different fields, from social work to art therapy to psychology and beyond, even, dare I say, the culinary arts skill would be amazing across a number of projects that we've worked with them on. And we've taken their skills and the expertise of their academic supervisors, and we've brought them together in this social innovation incubator that really was propelled by the Belfast Charitable Society some 6 years ago now. So it came from that small spark when we met Sir Ronnie talking about what Ashton Community Hub might mean. And then it just spun out from then, that ripple effect, not only through Belfast, but through different parts of Northern Ireland, working with the People's Kitchen, working with the Polish Food Bank, working with the North Belfast Advice Partnership, and many, many others. Seizing that opportunity to take those young minds in a university setting who desperately needed that employment experience. But more importantly than that, we didn't just need that. What they needed was to see how disciplines work together. What they needed was that incubator type environment where they could work in a safe, supported environment under the supervision of practitioners, whoever they are, to create and affect social change. So 250 years later, after this building was first established, the organisation that set that up is still affecting change. And what it is doing is that it's providing not charity anymore, well, it is doing that too, but it is an avatar to affect change and for social justice and actually for social good. And in that arena, what it is providing is an opportunity to students to engage in real life learning. And we hear that from me quite a lot, but real life learning that matches them with real people in real time with real problems in a supervised learning environment. That's experience that you can't buy until you're out in your working, and that then becomes a very different, less supportive situation. So for us as an academic institution, as a law school that you could throw a stone to, and maybe it was designed by trainee architects, who knows? And it has been really important for us to immerse ourselves and to center ourselves at the heart of this society and to help affect social change. But we don't do this alone. We do this with all of you. But we do this with a very important and critical link, I should say, linchpin, and that is Claire Mulroon. Claire Mulroon is the head of widening access and participation at the university. And I think that nothing happens without Claire. If there's any voluntary work going on in Belfast and beyond, then Claire has probably affected that change. So she's our very own social justice initiative, really. And so we could not set aside Claire Rowlands. So Claire is just going to speak about some of the projects that we worked with the Belfast Charitable Society and support. So I'm going to leave it there and how do we leave there?
Afternoon, everybody. I'm going to take you through some of the initiatives that the Social Justice Hub has initiated using a variety of different students, providing them with those real world opportunities and impact on social change here. So we set up the law clinic, and just before COVID, we were happy to receive a very generous donation from Alison Donaldson and family. And she provided us with a fund that allowed us to look at different opportunities to ensure that those working on the front line, the community and voluntary sector, on the front line to support everybody, had the knowledge that they needed. So we pulled together, this actually was the Saturday before lockdown, that we didn't know was coming. We actually had, this was at the McGee campus, and we had Mary Durkin in, and we did some family law training with a variety of different community partners, helping them to explore. We had the NFPCC, we had social work students, anybody as well as law students and other community partners, including a parents advice group, in to support them. Little did we know what would happen in a couple of weeks after that, and when we were in lockdown and we couldn't actually provide the support or indeed use the funds that have been given so generously by Alison. So our first thing was to think about what would we do if we were able to access people, how could we support social justice. In the meantime, we had met Paula and we had met Christy from Ashton, and we also had a relationship with North Belfast Partnership, and we looked that very first Christmas at what we could do. So Alison gave us permission to buy and to supply food for those, and that was at SSE Arena from memory, where a huge Christmas hamper campaign began and donations rolled in, and some of the money that we were afforded went towards that cause, and that relationship then sort of secured our future and our future working relationships with some of the local projects here. We then teamed up with North Belfast Partnership and Ashton Community Trust and indeed Belfast Charitable Society, and we used our knowledge of culinary arts. I approached the culinary arts team here on the Belfast campus and explained that we'd like to sort of refuel the young people going back into school. We knew at that point breakfast clubs and after school clubs had all been suspended due to COVID. When children were re-entering school, it was very limited, but we knew that a lot of the children were hungry. So we approached Alison again and asked, could we help fund this? And under the tutelage of Paula, Sinead McKinney and Christine McCune, we were able to create the Breakfast at Home Club. So basically, those people that were already receiving some support through food got an additional food parcel over a period of 10 weeks. And then we did 10 different breakfast recipes. So the culinary arts students were given the ingredients, they created the recipes, and then we used graphic design students to produce these. So when the packs went out, every week there was a different menu card, there was a different recipe for the children and the parents to create at home. And Ashton were key in identifying those families most at risk. We had limited funds, a great initiative, but we had it limited to 100 families. But you know, at the end of it, although it did come to an end again through funding, we did supply all of the equipment. I think Ashton secured a little money through Tesco's and they supplied the equipment. So although the recipes and the foods didn't appear every week, the recipe card, their knowledge and understanding and a cookbook and other things that we could do to help. And I know that initiative is still prominent, but unfortunately we didn't have the money to continue it in that way. We also used the money to provide lots of legal training. We had a really steep learning curve at the university when we pivoted to digital online. All of a sudden, Esther and I were able to run law courses, and if we'd run it on campus, we might have had 20 or 30 people. When we ran it online, we had hundreds of people. People were at home and they had the opportunity to avail of law training if they wanted to do employment law, if they wanted to know about domestic violence, or they wanted to explore furlough. Esther was at the helm, and we were able to do that. We also recognised the role of the community voluntary sector and that the expertise that sits in the sector. So we didn't do it on our own. We brought people with us. We brought in domestic violence, we brought in women's aid, we brought people to the table that knew what we were doing. We were approached by the NSPCC, and in particular Margaret Gallagher, who held the Northern Ireland campaign portfolio at the NSPC at the time, and she wanted to raise the issue of poverty and the lack of discussion around it. So we then were able to put together a poverty symposium, and we had 200 guests, and we were lucky to have experts in the field here. We had opportunities to showcase the work of Sinead Fury, who writes as a researcher in food poverty here, And we even looked across the water and we brought in some expertise from Scotland to tell us about their approach to poverty and how they have changed and impacted change in Scotland. Christine, you'll love this photograph. We also work with a variety of other students. So once Esther and I know that there are issues and we need support, I had heard the Ashton Community Trust were going to set up a food pantry. It was funded by the Belfast Charitable Society, and interactive media students helped design all of the web, the visual identity, but it was enough to get you up and off the ground, because that was your need. When I asked you what you needed, it was, we have no logo, we have no idea what we were going to call it, we have no idea what it was going to look like, how we were going to design it. So the students needed a real world project, so they came in and they did that, and they actually went on to win the award that year for that particular module. From the experience of the Breakfast Club, we worked then with the pantry and looked at what was coming in through food share. And, you know, there was no guarantee of what was coming, and sometimes it's very difficult if you go in and you're, you know, picking up food about what is it you're going to cook for the family. So we work with Mikey Gillies, that's Michael, in the Mass, there in his chef's whites. He then came to Ashton and understood what could rock up. Literally, you could open what came from food share and you really wouldn't know what was in the boxes. So Michael had an understanding of that, and with his students they created recipes, and we again then provided this in a cookbook. And what you see is the cookbook being tested. We have the volunteers last year down from Ashton that work in the social supermarket, and they got to come in and taste the recipes and have lunch, and some of the team, and I think Sean was showing off there. I don't think he actually did that at home with one of the recipes, but I think Frank and Christine and I, who were standing directly beside him, it's a wonder I managed to get a photograph. I was so proud. So the Social Justice Hub has also instigated the development of resources to help employment law, and we have, you know, led on that and developed this amazing resource. We have an online website, and this to support those that may not necessarily come from Northern Ireland with employment tribunals. And Judge Paul Buggy sort of instigated this project, and with the support of some funding that we got internally, we were able to produce this resource. There's a website, and it can be used in any language, so it's useful for anybody that comes forward. We also have to develop a schedule of laws, which also supports that activity. So those resources are out there. They've been developed by the law school in partner with the Social Justice Hub to support individuals. We also instigate different events to highlight things. We had the opportunity last year to support Father Greg Boyle, who came over from Homeboy Industries, and I had heard of him, and I actually, the week before we were doing our own event, I had read in a Sunday magazine, and I recognised his face because I had been sent a profile of him, and he was supporting a fundraising event in LA, and the key speaker was Jimmy Fonda. He was coming to Belfast the following week. It's me and Esther and I. So I'm going to come down. So he was for that. He came, and in all of the years, and I'm at the university a very, very long time, that particular event, he had a pin drop. There were 300 people in the new lecture theatre. And they came from all walks of life. Some of them were students, some of them had come from Dublin and Scotland just to hear him speak. And now I understand why. It was absolutely, he was so engaged, and he had you in the palm of his hand from he got up. He also brought 2 homeboys that had gang-related experience and had been in jail and had come out, and they talked about their own experience and what they were doing now, and how they were actually working in Homeboy Industries to help support others. And it really was about the compassionate support, and it was an excellent endeavour, and we're continuing to do that, and we hope to have Raphael Rowe in the next academic year to come and speak to our students as well. And I'm going to end now, which you'll be delighted to hear, and tell you a little bit about the legal practice module. This is an innovative module that is now offered to second year students at both the Derry London campus and Belfast campus, where it provides that real world learning experience for second year students to work in the advice sector and to go out and learn from the practitioners. They're the people that know how to deal with individuals that need support. They're the people that guide the students on the new systems. It gives them invaluable knowledge when they come out with a law degree and they rock up to their first job, either in a solicitors or help and support that. They know exactly what to do because they've had the support and they took the opportunity. The students self-select for that module. There are a limited number of places on it. So those students that really have a passion for it are the ones that are chosen, and the evaluations that we get back from that module in particular are really unbelievable. So last year, maybe 2 years ago, a young guy came to the presentation at the end, the law presentation at the end of the year, and he told me that he will never forget or ever had any understanding of what it was like when somebody rocked up to the clinic and sat down and he produced an envelope and it was brown, and he said, "What's the problem?" He says, "I can't open it. I just can't open it." And the student had no understanding of it, but the advice worker there knew exactly what he was talking about and they helped him through it, and that will stay with that student. He just couldn't understand it. He knew that inside that envelope there was something that was going to impact on his life. It was either going to be a bill or it was a letter from the Social Security to say the benefits were being withdrawn, or he needed to apply again, or he needed more evidence. So you can't really understand the impact of that until you speak to the students. And that's the sort of work Esther and I continue to do, and we continue to do projects. Indeed, last year, Paul, we had 4 projects for the 250th year, and I hope that the relationship between the university and the Belfast Charitable Society continues. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther, and thank you, Claire. Let me see what we're going to do here. We're going to take each of the questions and we're going to ask for a response. They're being recorded. Anyway, so let me start with the table in front of me. Dennis.
But we had a very light and very focused discussion here in regard to vision, particularly in North Belfast. And we said that we felt that one, there should be an assessment of the need and a factual report of what we consider would be issues that needed to be addressed. Secondly, we felt that there was a need to identify all the partners who were acting with regard to those various aspects of need, that in looking at stakeholders, that there should be a coordination of the partners and to collate proper delivery, that in collating that delivery, all of the partners would actively share information, and that there would be a uniform action plan approach that would hopefully focus in on what the various needs were, and that it would be monitored and properly evaluated to ensure that there was coordination of value.
Well, thank you for those very comments, and Paula is taking paying attention to that. And it will all be fed into the evaluation of this event. Now, if I move to the back, Les, are you in charge down there?
No,
You have
no,
a paper?
no, it's not
Is
in
it-
charge.
is it being done?
No, you're That's right, that's right.
My problem frustration. I made the mistake of writing first. Our group had 2 or 3 things in the tour we had. One was promoting open minds. I think what we meant by that was we moved from 2.5 centuries from the sturdy poor to the undeserving poor, to the idea of strivers and shirkers. So all the practical support that's provided should always have be allied with the idea that you're promoting that we don't blame the victim for being in the position that they're in, struck by the number of voices who's talked about being a good parent meant you have to go hungry, etc. So there's something about allying what we do in practical terms to that. The second one was about thinking about that this is for everyone. So it's not just about the key partners and how we collaborate then with local population. That probably is again allied back into the idea of a wider discussion about kind of the societal issues that we're in, particularly as social attitudes are becoming a little more positive towards issues like poverty, the need for adequate social security. And the third thing was having an overlay of a recognition that some of this is about a reallocation of resources, that we're not a poor society as a whole, and that brings you into questions of redistribution through tax, etc. But it also was about making the connection between local issues and the wider national and sometimes even global inequalities, so that again it's all part of that idea that it's not your fault if you find yourself in difficulties at a certain time in your life, and that some issues of inequality are deeply entrenched and start from birth. We didn't really get to question 2. I've written down the words Cliff Edge Coalition because that came up, but we didn't really get down to the discussion of partners in the time that we had.
Well, thank you, Les. That's it, no one wants to add anything? Right, so who's spokesman on table 3? Nobody. Right. Someone's going to say something, are they?
I think we have more general discussion.
Yes.
Rather than anything else.
And what was your main point emerging from your general discussion that you have to
I have to say,
create one?
I can speak maybe from a professional personal perspective. I'm in the statutory sector in the Department of Community. So I think that's where some of our discussion kind of went to, quite frankly, with not having the social inclusion strategies and anti-poverty, etc. Is there more government community? And how does an avatar for social reform achieve that? Especially, I suppose, if you want to make a multi-party voluntary coalition of not all of whom agree what the levers are or should be pressed to deal with social reform and social justice. It's some of where we went through our discussion. So I think that's the challenge here. One of the other points kind of being made is, particularly when we're using the word poverty, it's the image issue. It is that undeserving and deserving girl. The social reform movement needs to change the narrative. And I know that's a really trite phrase that's always brought up, but certainly within government and others need to change the narrative on what that means and how we deal with it.
Well, I think that is a useful note. Mr. Draw, things to conclude. Thank you all very much for your contribution. I'm not going to ask the questions because we're running out of time, but there's just a few things I need to do in conclusion. First of all, and that is to thank our speakers again, and if I have something for them. First of all, not here. First British Charity of this time is a wonderful publication. And this one happens to be signed by the person who presented the launch. Owen actually is the editor, and she has left us, but she was here today. It's signed by Owen, it's signed by myself, which doesn't matter, but it's signed by Mary McAleese. All three of us. Thank you very much. And Esther? I've got one for you as well. Thank you both very much. Claire, you've got a slightly different book, and it's this one, and that's because the others have already got this book. This book was It's much better. It was written to commemorate the 250th anniversary. There is no charge for this book. And you will find that there are some copies sitting on the mantelpiece. Please take one. There's no charge, but of course, if you'd like to make a donation or give it to someone who will make a donation, because of course, as I said, funding is key. But that would be anonymous because we wouldn't know whether you'd taken one and made no donation. But that wouldn't matter. That wouldn't matter. It will raise the profile of the society. Thank you. So they're on the shelf at the back, and there's some downstairs. And if you haven't got one, please take one or two for your millionaire friends. Now, this, however, is free. And you there. Now, ladies and gentlemen, just to wrap up, there are ongoing events for the society, and actually they're on the screen, but also they're on the sheet that you were given. And if you look at the front page of that, you'll see the various events. I won't go through them, but there are various events here this month which are set out there, and which I'm sure you'll find of interest to you. The next thing is donations. Well, of course, we're very keen to promote donations. And if you know anyone, please do your promotion, because we're very keen to receive additional funds. Indeed, it's essential, of course. Evaluation forms are on the table, and if you'd like to carry out an evaluation, please do, because we will feed it into the management of the next event. And finally, lunch is to be served, and it's available downstairs. And if you care to go downstairs, I hope everything has been set up, and we'll be ready. We're 10 minutes late in starting. I hope we're only 10 minutes late in finishing. Thank you all for your attendance. Please come to the next event. Thank you.